assumed he was trying to do that.
Hello there and welcome to the F1 Weekend Debrief, where we're looking back on an absolutely action-packed Monaco Grand Prix.
There you go.
Ah, medium compound. Are you sure?
Yeah, absolutely sure. You'll be fine. You crack on.
Okay. Yes, it was one of the best Monaco Grand Prix we've seen in many years, Rob Smedley, of course. Lewis Hamilton being hunted down on those worn medium tyres by Max Verstappen, but eventually he hung on to take the win. One of his toughest, he thought it was. What did you think?
Well, he said it was, so we've got to believe him. It certainly didn't look easy. You know, he had that medium tyre on and he was eking it out. He had a lot of graining on the front tyres, very, very difficult. But equally, it's really difficult to pass there. He just had to hold on and do what he did.
Okay, well, we'll get into the whys and wherefores of exactly how that decision came to be. But let's take a quick look at the start. Another brilliant one from Lewis Hamilton. He's really been working well in that position. But it was Valtteri Bottas and Max Verstappen that we thought was interesting. A nearly one for Verstappen.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, Max kind of puts it up the inside there, you can see, but Valtteri's on the outside. He's got the racing line and therefore he's got much more grip. He can brake a little bit later. Max has to do the right thing. And seed, otherwise they're both going to come together on the exit of San Diego. So I think, you know, it was good for Max to have a look, and certainly it was a brave thing. But Valtteri probably always had it covered.
Yeah, well, if we have a look at the start from Valtteri's chassis camera, the 360-degree camera on the front of his car, it's close, isn't it? At that point, Verstappen gets wise, but
at that point, but you can see that Valtteri's got the grip on that outside line there, and he can just get the. You will see it a little bit better from this view as well. He just manages to brake that little bit later, and once he's broken that little bit later, then he can get around the corner as well. And Max has to seed, as I said earlier, he has to seed, otherwise there's going to be an accident there. So Max has done the right thing. Valtteri's done a good job of defending.
What a great camera. Absolutely love that stuff. OK, well, after the start, we got to an incident where Charles Leclerc left a load of debris along the track. We'll have a look at Ferrari a little bit later. But when the safety car came out, the top four all pitted, which, firstly, I think was the right decision.
Definitely, they had the gap there to the fifth car, to Daniel, so that was the right thing.
Okay.
Should have pitted.
Mercedes stacked, and that meant Hamilton was out cleanly in front. But then when Bottas pitted, there was this incident with Max Verstappen and an unsafe release. So the big question is, were Red Bull right to let Verstappen go when they did?
Very, very difficult decision. The pit lane is so narrow there. That it's difficult to run along the yellow line. It's difficult to run between the fast and the slow lane, the left and the right of the pit lane, and come out without, you know, causing at least some kind of debris, which is what happened between the two of them.
I mean, they did get the penalty for it. If we look at it from Sebastian Vettel's nose camera, I mean, the other option is to hold Verstappen in the pits, but then they lose so many positions as to maybe compromise their race even more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, you've got the two options. You either have to release into traffic or you have to hold for the traffic. Holding for the traffic is always the worst case. And you saw there that they've released into traffic. I think at that point, Max needs some kind of message, because I don't think from that angle he knew that Valtteri was there. In fact, I would say almost certainly he definitely knew Valtteri wasn't there, because he's driven into the side of him. So he needs some kind of message, whether that's from the traffic light system, whether that's from his race engineers shouting down the radio to him that there's traffic there, and he can run along those two dotted lines that you can see that separate the fast and the slow lane.
This is a brilliant shot from Bottas's camera. He was so unfortunate, he was so hard done by, because he gets completely squeezed into the barrier, gets a puncture.
Yeah, he was. I mean, what we haven't really mentioned is the fact that, you know, when Max comes in behind him in that shot that you can see, he's about 2-3 tenths of a second, but then Max, you know, Red Bull obviously done a fantastic pit stop. Mercedes have done the opposite of a fantastic pit stop, and that's then swapped the cars around. So that's caused the the kerfuffle, if you like, in the pit lane is the pit stop times.
And what about the 5-second penalty for Verstappen? About right? Or some people were thinking it merited something a bit harsher, a drive-through, something like that, because it did effectively compromise, if not wreck, Bottas's race.
It wrecked Bottas's race, but Max has come out. You know, he probably would have had a surefire podium there in Monaco, and he hasn't. He's been demoted off the podium. I think it's about right. You know, I mean, anything more than that, then it starts to get a little bit too heavy for him. Okay, well, that of course meant that Max Verstappen was in second place on the road behind Lewis Hamilton, but with that 5-second penalty to bear in mind. So his team told him, didn't they, Rob? So what you could do is try and overtake Lewis Hamilton and get that 5-second buffer and still win the race. So the question is, of course, he had to go later on. Why didn't, this is the go later on in the race, but why didn't he try this move earlier on? He was just never close enough. He was just, I mean, that was fairly opportunistic, I would say, trying from that far back. You know, he's just managed to get his front wheel in line with Lewis's rear axle. It's fairly opportunistic. You can see he's completely locked up there trying to make the corner. It's just never going to work.
You say he wasn't in a position earlier on, but might he not have thought that, you know, Hamilton knows that I've got a 5-second penalty to take. He's in trouble with his tyres himself. He might just jump out of my way. Yeah,
I think you'd be a fairly hard push to believe that of Lewis Hamilton, to be honest, when he's got a race win in his hand. Yeah, it's not going to happen. You know, Lewis has done the right thing. He's defended it. He's left him, you know, just marginally enough room. They've had a minor contact, and Lewis has gone on to win the race from there.
So two things. Do you think Hamilton was lucky not to get a left rear puncture on that? And do you think it was actually worth Verstappen having a go?
I think I would probably agree with both of them. They were both lucky to come off with no damage whatsoever, and certainly not a puncture. Max had to have a go. You know, he's not wrong to have a go from back there. It was, as I said, it was fairly opportunistic from as far back as he was. It was probably never ever going to work, but he'd be kicking himself now if he hadn't have had a go.
Yeah, well, it was clever how Hamilton managed to keep Verstappen behind him. We've got another bit of analysis, Rob. You've seen this coming out of Portier, going into the tunnel. How did Lewis do it?
Well, what you're going to see when we slow it down is the way that Lewis gets the car turned quite early, and he's got it straightened up at the apex. So that's fairly clever. Max is then able, because he carries more speed into the corner, he's able to catch him. But you can see in the graphic in the middle of the screen there that because Lewis has got the car straighter, then he's getting better drive, better traction out the corner, and he's pulling out from around about 3.5 tenths on the entry, the mid corner of turn 8. I've got to call it turn 8 because I'm an engineer. He pulls out an extra 1.5 tenths, and that's just protecting him for the braking into turn 10, or the Nouvelle chicane, whatever you call it.
Yeah, because his rear tyres are fine, aren't they? His front tyres might have been grained up, but the rear tyres are in great condition, and he managed to lean on them to stay ahead.
Yeah, so he's got the traction and he's got the drive. What he's missing is that front end and get it turned in into the tunnel, into turn 8. Which is an understeer corner. So what he's having to do, he's having to make a really aggressive turn in order to get the car, you know, straightened up and not have understeer at the apex, which is going to slow him down. That's going to really affect the traction. So he's been clever and he's got the car turned, but he's a 5-time world champion with a Monaco race win in his hand, so he's going to be clever.
Indeed. Okay, well, the reason that Lewis Hamilton, of course, was in this position fighting with fading tyres against Max Verstappen, as our dramatisation at the top of the programme showed, that he'd been put on the medium tyres at his pit stop by his Mercedes team. Why did they do that?
Well, what Mercedes have come back and said is that they were relying on the lower working range of the medium tyre compared to the hard tyre. So what does that mean? It means that it works at a lower temperature. Okay. So for things like safety car restarts, it was going to be a better tyre, or they believed it was going to be a better tyre. And we were also having this threat throughout the race. We had a few radio comments that there might have been a few spots of rain. So you might have had this in-between track where it's in between a wet and a dry. So if you've got a tyre that works at a lower temperature, you can stay on that, and that was going to offer an advantage. Whether or not that was, you know, good risk management in terms of, you know, putting him out on a tyre that was for 66 laps or whatever it was, that was going to offer him a disadvantage against a hard, you know, betting against these scenarios of a safety car or a damp track, that's another question altogether.
And it was a question that Lewis Hamilton started to ask over team radio.
think I'm in big trouble, guys. Left front is dead.
Yeah, copy Lewis. All we can do is go as long as we can. We aren't going to box now.
We're going to lose this race, Monaco. I can't look after the tyres anymore. They're dead.
So Lewis, just thinking about it, if we manage to the same pace as the cars in front and you can still hold Verstappen behind, then we won't have to pass any of them. And
I can't keep the car behind, Mono. Can you not see that?
Yeah, no problem, Lewis. Yep, hear you loud and clear. Verstappen's been there all race.
Phew, well, Lewis was really worried, wasn't he? I mean, you've race engineered some great drivers. Would the temptation of Pete Bonington, his Mercedes engineer, not have been just to say, Lewis, we're fine. We've got track position, we're going to win the race?
Yeah, quite possibly, and that's in, you know, in thinly veiled terms is what he was trying to tell him. Yeah. The game plan was clear. They were never coming off that tyre. You know, you're at Monaco. You've got track position. You're leading that race. You're not coming off it. So whatever the chatter is, whether or not it's on another tyre or, you know, we need to pit now, that's not happening. And you know what Pete Bonington was trying to do there was just it's just man management. It's a little bit psychological. It's putting his arm metaphorically around the driver and saying, come on, we know what you're doing. We recognise the job that you're doing. It's brilliant. Let's just get this car at the end and win the race.
Did Lewis want the team to say, look, you know, we know we've given you a mountain to climb. We know we probably put you on the wrong tyre. We're sorry about that, but go on, do it anyway, which is effectively what James Vowles did.
There's a little bit of that. There's definitely a little bit of that because he'll have been frustrated because he's thinking, well, look, I had this race in the bag. Why have you given me this tyre, which is now making my life much more difficult? So he wants them to recognise that, and you know, probably the world has to recognise the job that he did. But you know, they were never going to do anything different to what they did. So it's just man management at that point.
What about this man management, driver psychology? You've worked with Felipe Massa back in the Jordan days, Heinz-Harald Frentzen. You've won races with him, Jean Lacey. What were those different characters like?
They're all very different, and they all need. You know, we're all human beings, and when you get, you know, sportsmen who are at the peak of their game, they all need different amounts of psychological management, let's say, and arms around them. You know, Felipe's a great one, and I think if you put Felipe in an environment where he feels respected and loved, which is something that we try to do with him, then he'll perform for you. You know, Jean Lazy is Jean Lazy, and for most of our older viewers, they'll know that Jean could be a little bit bad-tempered at times.
Fiery,
a little bit bad-tempered. I was very young at the time, so we used to have some good comings together.
I'm sure.
You know,
and
youth and fiery.
Yeah.
And then Heinz-Harald is a character who's very methodical. He needed very little of man management, to be honest. He was very good. But at the end of the day, I think when I look back, you know, if I could look back on my 25-year-old self there, I could see that probably he did need a little bit more support than we actually gave him.
Well, Monaco was a slightly improved showing from Ferrari. They broke the Mercedes 1-2 domination of the first few races, Sebastian Vettel coming home second. But he didn't make life easy for himself, did he, Rob, with this incident in free practice 3?
He certainly didn't. You know, a driver of his standing, his quality, his experience shouldn't be doing that. He should have turned out with that a lot earlier and tried to get up the escape road.
And how much would it have compromised his preparation for qualifying? Because it's at turn 1, Saint Devote. And then what are the team thinking when they see the replays of that? How long would it take to get the car back?
Well, that's the problem. I mean, you say it's not far from the pit exit. It's actually sat on the pit exit, but in Monaco is the worst place you can do that, between P3 and qualifying especially. Because what happens is they've got to wait to the end of the session to get the flatbed truck out. They then crane the car onto the back of that flatbed truck, and then it does about 3 miles an hour all the way around the circuit, and finally comes in the pit entry. And you can get the car back sometimes half an hour after the session's finished, and that just squeezes the time down that the boys have got to work on the car. So it's a bit of a panic, to be honest.
Well, it might have led to a bit of panic on Vettel's side of the garage, but once qualifying began in Q1, there was dismay on Leclerc's side of the Ferrari garage when they just misjudged how quick they thought he would need to be to get through to Q2. Can you understand why they didn't send him out again? Or would you have always said, come on, lads, let's go out again?
Look, it's easy to sit here now and have a judgment on it, and the judgment is always going to be correct, you know, even a minute after the event. At the time when you're in it, you've got a certain allocation of tyres to get you through qualifying 1, qualifying 2, qualifying 3. If you use up more tyres in qualifying 1, which is what they were trying to avoid doing, then what's going to happen is you've got less tyres for qualifying 2 and qualifying 3, which has an effect, a negative effect on that final result. And that's what they were trying to. It's that balance, that risk management of not wanting to kind of use all your tyres in qualifying 1. But you've got to get to a certain point where you say, well, we had a plan. That plan doesn't look, that plan doesn't exist anymore because we didn't do the lap that we needed to do in qualifying 1. Let's get another set on. Let's be safe. It's Monaco. If the risk here is way too big, the risk's too big almost anywhere. But in Monaco, the risk is enormous. And if it happens and you don't get out of Q1, then it happens exactly what happened to Charles this weekend. I've been there in many an occasion, and it's heart wrenching, to be honest. It's terrible, and you feel the weight of the world on your shoulders at that point. If you're trying to control the pit wall, and I'm sure the guys there who are responsible for it felt the world on their shoulders as well. So, I wouldn't. You never go and change all the procedures. You just got to look at what happened and why it went wrong and fix that bit, rather than saying that everything was wrong and let's change everything.
Of course, one thing leads on from the other, and what that misjudgment meant was that Charles Leclerc was starting well down the field and had to make up places. Now, some of them worked. This one on Lando Norris. And on the Ferrari-engined Haas, this one worked as well.
Yeah, they worked. I mean, you've got Lando who was compliant. You've got Grosjean who was also compliant, and you've got to have a competitor who understands that you're coming through and makes a little bit of room for you. The unfortunate truth of it was that when he came up behind Nico Hülkenberg, they didn't make room for him. There was no room, and that happened.
See, this is unfortunate because it's actually clean, doesn't touch Hülkenberg. Oh, it's the right rear.
Yeah, and he just misjudges it. Nico just holds his ground. He's well within his rights to hold his ground there. He leaves, probably a car width or maybe an inch less than a car width in between his car and the barrier. And Charles just slightly misjudges it. He's probably 2 inches, 3 inches across to the right more than he needs to be.
And then, like Gilles Villeneuve in the Ferrari in Zandvoort all those years ago, he comes back with a flailing tyre back to the pits. Would you have told him to slow down on the radio if you were his engineer?
Oh, come on, what's the point? I mean, you're Monaco, you're already 14th, 15th or whatever. People have said that after the race that he should have come back at walking pace. I can't really see the point. He was last anyway. You might as well get back and see if you can get anything out of it.
OK, but what about Vettel? I mean, he did everything right. He put on the hard tyres at the pit stop. That was the right decision. He didn't hit anybody in the pit lane. He only comes away with P2. I mean, can he wait for Ferrari to solve this problem they've got on the tyres? It's a thinner gauge, narrower gauge, isn't it? Thinner gauge on the tyres, which is helping Mercedes, and it's really hurt Ferrari this year.
Yeah, but you say, can he wait? He's got to be part of that process. He's a driver with a huge amount of experience. He's a technical driver. A clever guy in general. He's got to be part of that process. He can't just sit back and say, well, I'm waiting for you people to deliver me something fantastic. The driver's integral to that, and any driver who's worth his salt, who's won world championships, will know that. So Sebastian knows that. He's got to be part of that. He's got to be part of helping the team to dig themselves out of where they're at the minute and taking the fight back to Mercedes.
OK, well, moving on to Williams, they had their best finish of the season so far with George Russell, but it was Kubica who was left out. Robert Kubica was left out under the safety car. He felt that wasn't the right move, but he got into this tangle with Giovinazzi, and this was a bit clumsy from Giovinazzi, wasn't it?
Yeah, the move was never on when you see it from Giovinazzi's car. He's never going to make it, and I don't know whether he's just outbraked himself or what, but he's knocked, Robert around, and that's kind of ruined his race as well. You can see there's a massive traffic jam forming behind.
And poor Charles Leclerc.
Poor Charles Leclerc at that point was probably thinking, I don't want to live in Monaco anymore at this point in his weekend.
Well, picking up on Robert Kubica there, before he made his comeback this year, Rob, a lot of people were wondering about Monaco, how Robert would cope after his rally accident, going round the tight Lowe's hairpin with a restricted movement in his right arm. The answer is he coped brilliantly.
Yeah, it was always going to be the case, to be honest. I mean, you can see here the way that he drives the car. As he comes down to the hairpin, he uses that right hand to push the bottom of the steering wheel up and over. So he's using 70%, 80% of the force, he refers to it, in his left hand. But then as he comes down into those really tight corners into a left-hander, again, he uses the right hand, which has less articulation, the limitation, as he refers to it himself, to be able to steer the car. you know, been integral to Robert's comeback into Formula One. As when I was at Williams, it was always the case that this isn't a struggle. This definitely is a struggle. Don't ask me how he does it, because I think he's superhuman to be able to come back and drive Monaco at the speed that he's been driving. But he does it.
We do take it for granted a little bit this season. You know, I mean, Williams have got their own troubles. They're at the back, but he's still finishing races, finishing qualifyings, either ahead of Russell or just a couple of tenths behind him.
Yeah, it's incredible that what he's doing. You know, especially in the race. I think that. You know, that comeback, it's a real heartwarming story. It's a brilliant story for Formula One, and it's a brilliant story for Robert, because I don't think you'll meet a nicer, more determined man in the paddock. You know, there's no airs and graces. There's no Formula One razzmatazz about him. He's just a racer. He's a lovely guy.
And there was another noteworthy performance in Monaco, that of Toro Rosso. Danny Kvyat 7th, Alex Albon 8th. Great stuff.
Great stuff indeed. That car is a huge. If you look at the numbers, it's a huge improvement from last year. That synergy that they've got with the senior team now, and you know, I'm more and more impressed with Daniel Kvyat. I really am. I think that he's doing a brilliant job. I think that he's the real deal now. We're starting to see the real Daniel Kvyat, and Alex Albon isn't bad either. He's one to watch for the future.
Certainly is. 4 Honda-powered cars in the top 8. Amazing stuff. So from the tight and twisty circuit of Monaco, we go to a venue where the cars can really stretch their legs. The Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Canada.
Bienvenue au Quebec and welcome to Montreal.
The walls are closed and the curbs are high, that's why we love it.
There's a massive crash!
I lost control of the vehicle, hit the wall. There's nothing more to it than that.
Check the numbers, just keep pushing. This place is good. How are we doing? Out of the fastest smart track.
Straight into the barriers! That was a hell of a race! A hell of a race!
Yeah, Montreal, Canada. Great place for the race. What do you think we're going to see there?
Well, it's definitely, you know, with the downforce and the drag sensitivity there, it should suit the Ferrari a little bit better. You know, so that will allow them to close the gap. I'm sure that Mercedes are looking at that as well and understanding how they're going to be able to cope with that. I'm not sure that Ferrari can be in front, but definitely they can get back further on terms than they were in Barcelona and Monaco.
Okay, well, we will see, but of course we can't go without paying our respects to the late Niki Lauda, the 3 times world champion who died last week. Rob, legend is often overused, isn't it? But what are your memories of Niki?
I think legend is the correct word for Niki in this context. He was a great driver. He was, you know, a hugely analytical driver, very, very fast as well. And just, you know, a few personal memories of the little bit of time that I spent with him, you know, dealing over the Mercedes engine and stuff like that. I always found him quite a refreshing character in Formula One, and amusing as well. He had a great dry sense of humour, or it was a sense of humour based on being very, very straightforward and saying what he thought at that point in time. Great character, you know, he's done a huge amount for the sport.
Done a huge amount for Mercedes as well, successful in his airline business, successful at Mercedes Grand Prix with Toto Wolff, was key in bringing Lewis Hamilton to that team, and Lewis credits Niki with the success, much of the success, both of himself and the Mercedes team. I'll remember his charisma, his unique, down-to-earth style. The world really is a less colourful place without him. So, Dankeschön, Niki. Ciao. We'll miss you. Bye-bye.